So this is just a quick thought on what happened in Saturday's crane collapse
Coming down.
in Seattle, and that was a tower crane.
Moving now. Doing better, Don?
I can't say for sure, but
Looking good,
might
Jonathan.
actually be the same model of crane as this one. I can't, from the photos, I can't tell if it's a 316 or a
Looking
420.
good. Hold a minute.
Pretty sure it's not a 550, but it could be. I like I say, I can't say for sure. The crane was just the kind of the set the tone. That particular crane on the Google headquarters, I believe it was a Google headquarters, was set up in the middle of the building.
Alright, John, try
So-
again, coming down.
Likely
About 3.5 foot to go, yep.
what will be a stairwell or elevator shaft. That was where that typically happens in the middle of the building.
Looking good.
And those cranes are pulled out a little bit earlier because the roof needs to be finished. There's a lot of stuff still has to be done
Coming down.
when the tower crane comes out.
Good foot to go, yep. Coming
So
down.
this is a 316. This crane can have about 230 feet of
Hold
boom in it.
there. Hold that a minute.
We're putting windows in today. Anyway, so let's see. That particular crane,
Okay.
Kind of-
Pump down.
all of the tower crane operators that
Get
have
just a little bit of
seen
slack here. Hold that.
footage, all the tower crane operators that have seen the footage of the dash cam footage and the even the still pictures, where you can clearly see that the sections of the tower have easily come apart. They just didn't have the pins in them. So we kind of all can see that from a mile away, just of how
John, give me a little more slack.
the tower, when it
Little bump
leans
down.
over, for starters,
Hold there.
the tower, with no weight on it, with no jib on it, with no counterbridge on it, would be able to stand it. Normally we say they can stand at about 120 mile an hour wind with all this crap up here, but it probably could stand on its own maybe 150 mile an hour wind. So there's no way that that the wind had anything to do with what happened. It was just was
Nothing come down. I'm going to cut you loose.
the pins were pulled, and this particular model of crane,
Hold there.
there are pins that slide through. There's a male in that slides into the
Trolley
section
out. Get away
beneath
from
it.
me. Trolley
There's
out.
a pin that goes through and holds everything together. At each joint,
Put on up.
there are. I'm going to pause this for a second. Continue this here in a second. All right, now it's break time. So as I was saying, the connections from one tower section to the next, that the entire length of what might have been 250, 300, possibly even foot of tower, probably more like 250 or less, are made up of individual tower sections. The long sections are, I believe, about 40 feet. About 40 feet tall. I have the component list up here. I'll get that for you in a minute. About 40 feet tall, and they at each corner, post goes down, and there's two pins. The post that goes down is a piece of metal that's almost as big as my head. Goes down solid steel with machine holes that are almost 2 inches in diameter, maybe 1 7/8 inch in diameter, and they go through and hold the tension forces of when the crane is picking up something this way. This side over here is trying to come out, where this side over here is getting shoved down in there. So anyway, that pin holds that tension forces when that side of the tower is in tension. Anyway, so those pins hold from coming out, and there are two pins. And I think it's two pins on every size crane that I can think of that has the pins in the towers. This particular tower crane has the older style tower that still used two bolts. It's kind of a totally different system. Normal person wouldn't notice the difference from the ground, but it's a totally different system that the bolts themselves are actually in tension. Here is just the pin is just keeping a tower corner from sliding out. But point is that there are 2 pins in each corner. I guess we call it corner of the tower. On a boom, we call that the cord, and I can't think we have a different name for that on the corner strut of the tower. That has a specific name. I'm blanking on it right now. But on that corner strut, there are 2 pins in every model that I can think of that keep that single corner from coming out. And again, on the other corner, there's 2 more pins. There's 2 more pins. There's 2 more pins. So there's 8 pins that have to be driven out. To remove 1 tower section. So you drive out 8 pins, pull out the cotter keys, pull out the cotter keys, and you drive 8 pins out, and then you can remove 1 section. I'd seen comments of people on the impression that those pins can't be driven out with the weight of the crane, with the weight of the tower sections on there, and that's not always true. It's kind of often true if there's not a bunch of grease on there left over from last time. It can be hard to drive them out with the weight on there, but now it's designed to fit in there so that you don't lower it in and then you shove the pin through so that the pin is always taking the stress. It's machined out properly so that when it hits the bottom, the pin is then aligned. Now it sounds subtle, but it's quite different than the pin always holding the weight. So if you and I were to make this kind of section, we'd say, okay, we'll drill 2 holes in here and 2 holes in here, and we'll simply slide this down until those holes align, and then we'll put the pins in. Okay, so until you put the pins in, well, that's not the way this system works. This system goes all the way down in touches. It's actually pressing down, and then everything is when it's made is machined to align so that when it's sitting down all the way, the pins should be able to slide in. When it's new, everything fits in. When it's new and there's no hammer dings and everything fits in easily, relatively easy. If it's lubed, everything that can go in with a relatively small amount of work. And what that means is that with that corner sitting down there, those pins can be removed, and the tower is still quite happily setting, transferring its load to the tower section beneath it, and those pins can be removed, and nothing. If everything, the irony is if everything is in compression, the pins can come out quite easily. I know there'll be many iron workers that say, "Well, God damn it, they usually have to beat my ass off to get these pins out." Yes, often you do, but not always. So anyway, my point is that the pins can be removed while the crane is erected. Now, oddly enough, if you try to remove those pins when the crane was in use, even when the crane is in its to remove all of them, as the crane normally sits, it'd actually be kind of difficult because on one side you could remove them because they're under compression, but the other side, on the tension side, the pins would actually be taking load, so that that edge of the tower would be trying to come up, and then so to beat those pins out would be much more difficult. Iron workers are typically strong guys and gals. If they didn't know any better or whatever, they could do it. They can swing a hammer pretty hard, but it would be harder to take them out if the crane was under load. But once you take the boom off of one side, once you take the counterweight and the machinery deck and the counter jib off the other side, all that's left is a compression. Pins can come out. Now, so here is the most important part. Really, I should have gotten to this earlier. Is that the pins are never to be taken out before it's time for that tower section to come off. So no one would give, no technician, crane technician, I won't use the name of that company, would give the order to go ahead and take all the pins out, and we'll just lift the tower sections out as they come. No crane, none of the crane technicians would ever do that. Now, it is possible that let's call them rogue, because this wouldn't be the official crane technician policy line. It is possible that a technician might say, okay, Bob and Jim, ironworkers, why don't you guys go ahead and get a start on taking these, taking the pins out. Obviously, just only take out half of them. Take out one, per corner. Leave the other one in. Maybe get a start on that. Just do that now in a section or two. It would be possible for them to have fudged that. Normally there would be 2 pins to remove. So going down that road, what could the technician have said to communicate that action? They could have said, why don't you go ahead and start taking the pins out. Now, if this crew had worked together before, or maybe the technician thought that those ironworkers had worked together before, they thought they'd covered it before, like when we're in a hurry, it's kind of okay. We can get away with taking out one out of every corner, and there's still plenty of strength to do everything as it normally would be done. Maybe one per corner, but maybe there was like a 2-part miscommunication. Technician could have said, why don't you go ahead and get a start on those pins? Well, maybe if somebody said something like that, would have been start only taking the cotter keys out. Maybe we wanted to go through and make sure all the cotter keys would come out. We want to make sure that the pins would move. Maybe start on it means make sure that the pins were lubed so they could come out. And say that the miscommunication was only slight. Then it would be easy to imagine, say there's a delay. Now, obviously, I have no idea of the timetable of the Seattle Google headquarters. I don't know any of the details about what was going on there. But if there was a delay, for example, maybe there was a problem getting trucks, or the crane was, or the hydraulic crane was broke down, or some other type of delay in the small crew in charge of getting started on the pins, had some more time on their hands, then they might have gone through and done a little bit more. Maybe they said, well, what did he say again? He said, oh, why don't we go ahead and just take the rest of them out? Or maybe somebody else said something to that crew. Say, hey, did you make sure you got a good start on the taking out of on those pins? And say, yeah, or so if there's a delay, maybe somebody else got involved and say, okay, now go back and make sure that you've done this step well enough, and that crew took all the pins out. So all we know and can see clearly from hundreds and hundreds of feet away, seeing the components of the tower come apart. All we know is that they were taken apart. We don't know why. So this is me speculating as to why, what kind of miscommunication would have happened to cause someone to take them apart. Was it? Sometimes we tend to think that, oh, one guy said clearly, do this, and another person said, yes, sir, I'll take these pins out. Or was it more complicated than that? Was there a delay in there? Was there some confusion about what one crew was doing while, let's call it the technician was up top pulling apart the machinery deck? Were there 2 extra people? Were there 2 extra iron workers on hand on this particular day, and that weren't? Let's say it's totally possible that there were two other guys that they thought they weren't going to have beforehand show up to help out, to make sure everything's ready to go. There's a delay, and the two guys that were going to be landing components say, okay, why don't you guys go up and help them out? And they go up and start removing pins on their own. I've seen people commenting on other videos saying that everyone knows exactly when the pins are being taken out and what exactly that means. No, they aren't. It's oftentimes the ironworkers that come out to disassemble the crane. In Seattle, it's more typical that they have taken apart and put together more cranes. Here in St. Louis, there can be pretty big gaps between when an ironworker, it might have been a year since an ironworker last put together and took apart a crane. It's not an everyday thing. In Seattle, those ironworker crews out there, it's closer to an everyday thing. But again, I don't know how much time those ironworkers had out there that were involved, how many tower cranes they'd taken apart. The pin system is a relatively new system. It's quite possible that the ironworkers were under the impression that it was okay to take them out earlier, and so we just don't know exactly why the pins were taken out, who told somebody to take out the pins, if the crew that took out the pins were even told to take them out. All we know is the pin system. We can clearly see that from the photos. There's a photo of a black car being squished by a tower section, and you clearly, plain as day, see the extension, the nub that comes on the bottom side of the tower section that is meant to poke into the tower section. Well, it's clearly plain as day what kind of tower system that is, and we just don't know why. And it comes down to communication. It comes down to knowing what the crew underneath is doing. It often comes down to one of my main complaints is radios. Are there enough of them? And that if the only people that have to have the radios, I would say have to have the radios, are the crane operator at the bottom, the crane operator at the top, and the technician or whoever is doing the signaling on top. So might only absolutely have to have 3 radios, but it's best when each crew or each, let's call them micro crew, like 2 guys go down to do this. It's best if everybody either has a radio or is working with someone that has a radio, because it's possible that the technician up top thought, what are those guys pounding on? Are they working on taking the pins out? And then have that curiosity, have that question come up, but not really be able to follow up, to execute on, hey, what are these guys doing? Can you see what they're doing? And say they didn't have a radio, and so you can't, once they're out of radio contact, then it becomes complicated to ask them what they're doing. And so there's oftentimes that comes up. A couple guys that go off and start working on something, and now what are they doing? What are they working on? And hey, make sure you're not doing X. Make sure you're not doing Y. Make sure did you actually do it this way? And that's the one thing that everybody having radios really helps with, is because you can say, hey, are you doing this? And then you can actually rely on your communication skills, saying, well, he didn't directly say no, or he didn't directly say yes, and say, hold on, let me come down there and look. When crews get separated when you have people working without radios or without a partner with a radio, then it is possible for them to get started on a whole thing and continue on a set of action that we really never that did not need to be done in the first place. So it is it's quite possible that somebody had an inkling that something was going that wasn't right, but then wasn't able to follow through because it didn't have enough radios. So why the miscommunication happened, we just don't know at this time. We'll find out over the coming weeks and months.